Greetings, Sentinels fans! I think it is time to finish up this list about the distinguished cards from the Cauldron decks. It's kind of been hanging over my head for the past little while. So, let's get started, shall we? The Adrift set features Gargoyle, Gyroaur, Drift, Pyro, and Terminus. And look at that, they saved the most complicated ones for last. For my own sanity, I'm going to start with probably the simplest of these, Gyroaur. She's a fun one, with a similar fish out of water deal that Skyscraper has. It seems Gyroaur has the ability to roll up into a ball and hit things. However, as one might assume when you are rolling around, she doesn't really seem to have much control over herself, and is about as apt to hit her allies as her enemies. Her distinguished cards are her Crash cards, with which I will single out Spear of Devastation. I will also put in Hyperspin, Reptarian Shell, and the Gyro Stabilizer. Most of her cards have the Crash keyword, signifying her rolling around. The effects vary, but most have the theme of accidentally hitting herself or an ally as well as the bad guys. Many of her effects check how many Crash cards she has in her hand, and can scale up or down depending, and this might apply a negative effect depending. That's why the Gyro Stabilizer is helpful. When checking effects, the stabilizer can behave as if you have one more or one fewer Crash cards in your hand, allowing you to optimize how you please. Sphere of Devastation is a good example of how the amount of Crash cards in your hand can affect things. When this card is played, discard your hand, draw a card, and hit one dude with an amount of damage equal to the amount of Crash cards you discarded times 4. You know I love my cards that do one really big hit. In addition, if 10 or more damage is done this way, you also destroy all environment cards in play. Note to self, retreat to minimum safe distance. Now to be fair, this might not be the best example, as once you have 3 Crash cards, you don't really need to keep track. For the others, you need to know if you have, say, 3 or more Crash cards, or any Crash cards, or if you have no Crash cards. If you're trying to get the best out of Gyroaur, you're pretty much trying to impose order on a very chaotic character. Reptarian Shell does help with this order a bit, as it has a power that makes you reveal cards from your deck until you get a Crash card and place it into your hand. With the trade-off being that if you don't have any Crash cards at the end of your turn, you will hurt a friend. Now Hyperspin goes in the other direction and leans into the chaos. This card increases the damage dealt by Gyroaur, but if you draw a Crash card, it goes directly into play, and this card is destroyed after the effect is over. So using this card is putting your fate in the heart of the cards a bit. Next up on our list, let's do Drift. Drift does time travel in a unique way. Instead of moving herself to different points in time, she is able to morph things into past or future versions of themselves, summon weapons and armor from various time periods, see briefly to the future or past. It's all very chaotic. She has a shift mechanic, where she has a card displaying her position in time, with the leftmost 2 blue spots being in the past, while the 2 orange spots to the right are in the future. Except she doesn't seem to actually time travel, and it's just... This one confuses me, I'm sorry. When she is in the past, Drift is more support-oriented, while in the future, she is more combat-oriented. She tends to swap between those 2 focuses pretty frequently. Now most of her cards have effects to activate from one side or the other, sometimes achieving both. So one card may end up serving the purpose of acting as 2 cards, depending on where she is in time. So in essence, I'm close to doubling the amount of cards I'm looking at. It can be a bit much sometimes. Thankfully, I think I've gotten the hang of her. Her distinguished cards are Out of Sync, Transition Shock, and one of the double up one-shots. So let's go with Destroyer's Adagio. With Drift, you need to either figure out what you want to be doing on your next turn to plan out how you do things, trust chaos to work out, or focus on a roll. Out of Sync helps lean into the focus on a roll by reducing damage dealt to Drift by 1 when she is in the past, and increasing damage dealt by her by 1 if she is in the future. Pretty simple, but it does lean into those rolls. Now I like to swap rolls a lot, so Transition Shock is a fun one to use. When this is in play, whenever Drift would switch from the past to future or future to past, she will deal herself and one bad guy 1 point of damage. By itself, it's a little extra boost, but combine it with Out of Sync, and you get a fun strategy. Either deal damage to a dude and none to yourself, or deal 2 damage to a dude and 1 to yourself. And since the vast majority of her powers shift her in one direction or the other, sometimes both, you can activate this a lot. Yeah, her cards shift her around on the time card. Sometimes 1 spot, sometimes 2, sometimes 3. In the case of Dragon's Dance and Destroyer's Adagio, you can go in one direction and then end up going in the other. Remember, Sentinel's card effects are done in order, top to bottom. So while Imposed Synchronization doesn't do both effects because it shifts drift away from the other time period, Adagio does the first effect, moving you one spot in the future. And then, if you shifted time periods, you can then use the future effect, which will then throw you back into the past. And with Transition Shock, all those shifts is more damage. This character is fun for the player who enjoys planning out their future turns, although at the cost of reduced ability to react to new problems. Now let's look at Gargoyle. This one plays with damage boosts all the time, and would appeal to the player who wants to maximize efficiency when dealing damage. His distinguished cards are Leech Field and Mark of Execution. Leech Field is what I consider his most important card, and it does a very good job at illustrating his whole deal. Once per turn, whenever he or another hero deals damage, Gargoyle can reduce that damage by 1, and whenever he does, he will increase his next attack by 1, essentially storing up damage for his own attacks. Imagine, if you will, you are hitting an enemy minion, but the only attack you've got exceeds their hit points. Some of that damage will go to waste. Have no fear, Gargoyle is here. He can take the excess damage and save it for himself to use in other areas. This can even be done for irreducible damage, pretty much giving you a free +1. The Leech Field also reduces the first damage dealt to Gargoyle every turn by 1, and that will also boost his next attack. He wants to get involved in all the fights. He must be lovely on Twitter, just soaking up all that force for himself to use. Mark for Execution gives Gargoyle and all other heroes a power where Gargoyle deals one target 2 damage and a second target 1. Yes, he is dealing the damage, and he's giving this power to every hero. So heroes that don't have access to easy damage or are currently doing less than Gargoyle can use this power. I guess Hugh Lousley's Cosmic Weapon can suck it. Additionally, since it's Gargoyle doing the damage, it combos well with Terrorize, and if there is only one target you can hit, you can send that compulsory second attack to himself, so that Leech Field can absorb the hit. Riding in is Terminus, the cop, the ghost cop. Our frankly kind of terrifying Spectre has 4 cards that we are looking at: Graven Shell, Stained Badge, Covenant of Wrath, and Chain Conductor. Let's start with the Chain Conductor, as he's a good introduction to Terminus. The Conductor sets her on this job, and when you play this card, he discovers for you an equipment or memento. This also provides a little stipend of Wrath points for you. Terminus's 2 unique mechanics are the mementos and the Wrath points. Getting access to equipment that gets you Wrath points or your mementos are key to her success. Of her mementos, Graven Shell is my favorite because I like damage, but people would be rightfully annoyed with me if I didn't talk about Stained Badge as well. Mementos are fun because they're completely indestructible, so put one in play and it will stay there for the whole game. However, the trick is which one to play, since you can only have one. If you already have a memento in play, playing a second one will get it removed from the game. Now when this is out, she gains Wrath for everything she destroys, but every subsequent memento you play gives Terminus a permanent +1 to damage, making her even more dangerous than before. Stained Badge, however, gets the guy's award for breaking the game. When this memento is out, the Terminus character card becomes indestructible unless she's the last hero standing. Yes, while this card is out, she can't be incapacitated. Even if her hit points reach 0, as long as another hero is up, she can keep going. As she has a lot of effects that make her hit herself, this can be nice. And whenever a villain hits a target with the lowest hit points, they will target her, which is of course quite pointless because she's indestructible. Now if she has the badge in play and has more than 0 hit points, then she will get a free Wrath token every round. But that feels like small potatoes compared to her inability to die. Now Terminus is able to gain and spend Wrath points in various ways in order to deal a ton of hurting. One of the simplest ways, and one of my favorite ways, is Covenant of Wrath. This card gives you a power where you can straight up deal 6 damage to one target, and then spend 3 Wrath points to prevent this card from destroying itself. I don't know, there's something immensely satisfying about straight up dealing 6 damage like it's nothing. Also, you are hitting someone with a freaking train, so there's that too. Wrath points are also spent to play extra cards and use extra powers and deal increased damage, so feel free to play around. And finally, the one I fear talking about most, Pyro. I find Pyro difficult to understand, probably because it's unclear as to whether irradiating cards is good, bad, or neutral in the context of the game. I will admit to asking for help on this one. Pyro's distinguished cards are Particle Collider, Chromodynamics, Containment Breach, and Rogue Fission Cascade. Before we get into these cards though, you have to understand the mechanic. Pyro has the ability to irradiate cards in a player's hand. So they take one of these cards and sleeve it with the card that it is attached to. If that card were to leave the player's hand either by entering trash or entering play, then the irradiated effect goes away. By itself, the effect does nothing, but it can interact with Pyro's cards. Most of Pyro's cards can irradiate cards, but if you need something with high speed or reliability, I usually go with the Cherenkov drive or the thermonuclear core. The Particle Collider is one that is always nice to have. It gives Pyro power where he can make another hero play an irradiated card, in addition to doing 1 energy damage to a bad guy. Handing out card plays to other players is always a great time, though using this requires planning out what cards among your friends' hands you want played, so you can irradiate the ones that you want. The damage is pretty much a bonus at that point. Chromodynamics gives Pyro another power where you can discard a card to deal 2 targets 2 lightning damage. But that's not nearly as interesting as the fact that, if this card is in play, every time an irradiated card enters play, Pyro will deal 1 target 1 energy damage. So if you've been spreading the love around, then you can get a lot of damage in. This effect is even compounded by our next card, Containment Breach. This card gives Pyro a power where he can deal himself and all bad guys 1 energy damage. But shift your focus to the other effect, where every time an irradiated card enters play, until the end of Pyro's turn, increase energy damage dealt by him by 1. This can, of course, power up Containment Breach's own power, but it will also boost Chromodynamics. So with the help of teammates, you can be doing tons of damage over the course of a round. However, Containment Breach has a downside. If you have a copy of Rogue Fission Cascade in your trash, then when an irradiated card enters play, one of those is shuffled into Pyro's deck, reaffirming its threat. And now that I've mentioned this card, let's talk about the Cascade. We have another example of a Suddenly card, aka a card that plays itself when it enters a hand. And when a card plays itself, it's generally not a good thing. This is the big downside to stocking up on radiation, as it can really hurt if your heroes have a lot of them stored up. It's almost as if radiation is dangerous. That can't be good. When this card hits play, usually without your permission, Pyro will deal damage to every hero that has irradiated cards, damage equal to the amount of irradiated cards in all hands. So if you have 10 irradiated cards across all hero hands, that is going to hurt. A lot. How do you even articulate how bad that is? Oh no. Yeah, they'll do it. So if you ever get cocky when playing with radioactive isotopes, remember it might blow up in your face. Words to live by. So I hope you have enjoyed this video finishing up the distinguished cards list for the Cauldron Heroes. Have a wonderful day. Take care, friends.